Hello everyone, I'm Jack Fisher and welcome to my world. And usually, when a new Marvel movie comes out, I can't wait to see it on opening night. And afterwards, I'm often eager to make a video offering my thoughts, feelings, and overall assessment. Unfortunately, this time is going to be different. Because I'm going to give my review for Morbius. And to say some people have been harsh with this movie would be a huge understatement. This might be the least thrilled audiences have been for a Marvel movie since Ghost Rider 2. Now, I know it's not unprecedented for a Marvel movie to have a lot of negative buzz, but still be a hit. Not too long ago, the first Venom movie was heavily panned by critics, but fans still loved the movie. And it went on to become a big hit for Marvel and Sony, ultimately earning it a sequel, which also got critically panned. But that's besides the point. However, Morbius is not Venom. He has neither the profile nor the established fan base. The only thing this movie has going for it is Jared Leto's star power, whatever it might be at this point, and the lingering afterglow of Spider-Man No Way Home. That's not nothing, but it's still not much in the grand scheme of things. And it seems that for once, critics and fans alike are on the same page with this movie. And by any measure, that's not a good sign. Despite all that, I didn't let those early negative reactions dissuade me from seeing this movie. I admit, I've certainly enjoyed movies that have been panned by both fans and critics. I suspect most of us have at some point. But after seeing Morbius and taking some time to process it, I'm ready to offer my take. And if I don't sound as excited as usual, well, I think you'll understand why soon enough. That being said, I'll still give a standard spoiler warning. Even if there isn't much worth spoiling, I still encourage people to judge this movie for themselves. Don't let me or anyone else on YouTube tell you how to feel about a movie. This is just one lifelong Marvel fan's opinion. Now, in terms of basics, Morbius actually checks most boxes. It doesn't radically deviate from the source material, and it doesn't radically reinvent the character of Michael Morbius. Like the comics, Morbius is a chronically sick but undeniably brilliant young man. He suffers from a rare congenital blood disease. That disease is never identified. All we know is that it's serious enough that it severely limits his ability to walk and function normally. Both he and his childhood friend, Milo, have suffered this condition all their lives. They really have no idea what it's like to be physically healthy, let alone strong. It's an undeniably tragic set of circumstances. But again, it is very much in line with the original comics. And, despite those harsh circumstances, Morbius dedicates his life to finding a cure for his condition. That seems downright heroic by default. The movie even shows him having some measure of success along the way. He becomes a world-renowned doctor, specializing in blood-related diseases. He even manages to win a Nobel Prize. Overall, it's not a bad foundation for the character. We get this incredibly sickly man who is suffering. He knows others like him are suffering. And he has way more motivation than most to find a cure for this condition. But beyond these basics, well, this is where the movie really starts to falter. Events unfold in a way that's choppy, erratic, and shallow. There really isn't an effort to flesh out any characters other than Morbius or Milo. But even for those two, they're never developed to a point where they feel compelling or engaging. I sincerely doubt this movie is going to make anyone feel for Michael Morbius the same way they felt for Peter Parker in No Way Home. It's not that he's a bad character or that Jared Leto is a bad actor. There just isn't much there to get attached to. In lieu of developing these characters, much of the plot centers around Morbius' efforts to develop a radical new treatment involving bat DNA. We see how he sets it up, from trapping a bunch of bats from a cave in Costa Rica to preparing a lab for human trials. But again, there isn't a whole lot of depth or detail into this effort. And at times, the circumstances just don't make any sense. Like, how does Morbius determine that bat DNA is the cure to curing his condition? How does he even develop this treatment in the first place? Why is he unable to test or experiment with it through the usual institutions? And how the hell is he able to do so much with just him and his assistant/love interest, Martine Bancroft? There are a lot of unanswered questions within the first 20 minutes of the movie, but it never really bothers with the details. It just rushes headfirst into Michael using himself as the first test subject for this radical treatment. A treatment that ultimately turns him into the monstrous living vampire that we already know he's going to become. Now, I get wanting to skip the boring details in favor of blood-spilling action. I even admit that action is pretty solid. If this movie has any strengths, it's how it choreographs the action. When Morbius is in full vampire mode, it's a visual spectacle. The use of Matrix-style bullet time and close-up shots of his monstrous face, it's legitimately well done. But still, its overall impact is just so limited. We just don't see enough of this character to really care about what's happening to him. We haven't grown attached to him or those around him to get emotionally invested in what he's doing. We only ever know the basics. Yes, he's sick with a debilitating condition. He wants to cure that condition, and he's willing to take drastic measures to do so. And in his desperation, he ends up turning himself into a monster. It has all the necessary ingredients to be a compelling, emotionally charged story, just not enough effort into bringing it all together in a meaningful way. At times, it feels like way too much happens off-screen. We, the audience, are expected to fill in the blanks for how certain things emerge from a given situation, just so we can get to the blood-soaked action. I get that's sometimes unavoidable in a movie. It's rarely possible to cover every aspect of a story's progression, but in the case of Morbius, those gaps in the plot are just way too big. As a result, a lot of what happens from the midpoint on feels so contrived. The movie becomes less about telling Michael's story and more about setting him up to become the blood-sucking anti-hero we expect him to be. But for that kind of story to have any impact, it just can't be rushed or forced. But that's exactly what this movie tries too hard to do. All this messy contrivance also shows in how the movie portrays the main villain of the story, Milo. Now, I won't go so far as to say he's the worst villain ever to show up in a Marvel movie. He actually has a lot more personality than someone like Malekith the Accursed from Thor 2. And Matt Smith does remarkably well in giving this character a presence in every scene he's in. But overall, he's just not that interesting. Or menacing for that matter. Whereas Morbius is horrified by what this cure has done to him, Milo is enchanted by it. When he takes it, and it's not all that clear when or how he does, he embraces the monster it turns him into. And it's even understandable why to some extent. Early on, before he ever even becomes this monster, it's clear that Milo has issues. Far beyond just having some debilitating blood disease, he is not a stable personality. Even when he's very sick, he's prone to violence and resentment. He hates living in this limited, crippled condition. He wants to go out and live life. He wants to drink, fight, and flirt with beautiful women. And when he hurts innocent people, including the people who care about him, he doesn't show a shred of remorse or hesitation. While it does make for some dark and bloody scenes, Milo's descent into villainy is hardly that compelling. It's hardly even a descent. Like much of the movie, there are a lot of gaps and blanks. We really don't see the substance of his story play out at any point. He really only exists to give Morbius someone to fight who can actually hold his own. That's really the only role he has. The same can be said of Martine. As a character, she's painfully basic, acting as little more than a generic love interest. Yes, she is a character taken straight from the comics, and her romantic ties to Morbius are very much in line with the source material. But there really is nothing else to her. She's just a pretty face who quips with Michael, worries about him constantly, and ultimately becomes a target. And at one point, she comes dangerously close to getting fridged completely. But even though the movie just barely manages to avoid that, there's just no real depth to her, or her relationship to Morbius for that matter. There isn't a sense that these two have a deep romantic bond beyond just working together. And if you weren't familiar with the original comics, you'd think that she was just some glorified damsel, and nobody would blame you. Now, if I'm giving the impression that I thought the movie was terrible, I apologize. I'm simply harping on the flaws and shortcomings because this movie just has so many. Many more than you'd expect of a Marvel movie, especially after what Spider-Man No Way Home delivered. And yes, this movie does have some strengths. Like I said earlier, the action sequences were solid, more so than Venom in some areas. If you need a valid reason for giving this movie a chance, the action scenes certainly qualify. The way it shows Morbius moving at superhuman speeds, the way it depicts his vampire powers, and the way he uses those powers to defeat Milo, it's legitimately well done in that respect. I was certainly entertained by those parts, but everything in between, not so much. If you go into this movie just hoping for some quality action, you'll be satisfied, or at the very least not overly disappointed. Jared Leto and Matt Smith do a great job handling the physical aspects of their characters. The way they shift between being human and being monsters is great. It keeps the movie from ever feeling too boring. But even if you aren't bored at any point, you aren't going to be too intrigued either. The only real intrigue in this movie comes with the mid and post-credit scenes at the end. I won't spoil them, but they really don't have much impact in terms of the larger story. They just tease the possibility of a Sinister Six movie. Overall, I did find some entertainment value in Morbius, and I don't regret seeing it on opening night. I wouldn't go so far as to call it a bad movie. It certainly has the necessary pieces to be something far greater. It even has a good foundation in terms of characters, themes, and interconnected plots. There just isn't enough depth or polish. But again, I encourage everyone to judge for themselves. I'll simply encourage everyone to give it a fair chance. And let's face it, Marvel has spoiled us a lot lately, setting such a high bar for quality in superhero movies. If nothing else, a movie as flawed as Morbius should help us appreciate just how far the genre has come, and how it's not immune to falling short every once in a while. Thanks for watching, everyone, and thanks for joining me in my world. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, take care and stay safe.